for Team 4. My name's Steven, Eric, and Andre. Our final project is on an anti-bullying web service. It's titled eBully. So jumping into it. The content, basically an overview of what we're going to talk about today, is the social problem space, a survey that we did, requirements of the actual site, users, functions, things like that, design innovations, prototyping, and the evaluation of the actual site. And then we'll give you a brief walkthrough through it as well. The social problem space, basically as technology evolves, so does the means for intimidating people. So bullying is just about intimidation, and it's moved into the cyber realm. So cyberbullying happens on a day-to-day basis everywhere. And it's in the news a lot, so you guys might have heard about it. But the point in this service is to identify cyberbullying messages that are on Facebook, MySpace, Twitter, things like that, and show them to an e-volunteer. Once the e-volunteer sees it, they can kind of review it, look through it, determine if it's really a bullying message or if it was just falsely picked up by the computer, and then have that chance to intervene with that person and provide resources if necessary, and just provide a dialogue with that person saying, hey, we noticed there's bullying type messages, and we'll go through that a little more. This evolution sparks cyberbullying now. People can no longer simply walk away from bullying. Bullying used to be something that happened at school, and you went home and it was done, but now you go to school, get bullied, come home, you get text messages, Facebook messages, you can't get away from it. And there's a psychological phenomenon called the bystander effect, which implies that the larger the group is that an emergency happens in, such as someone needing help, the less likely any one individual will help. So it's distributed. The responsibility is distributed amongst many people. For things like Facebook, MySpace, Twitter, someone has 536 friends, everyone else will say, oh, these e-volunteers are here to pick up that slack. It's everywhere. It's an email, text, social media, like we talked about before. It's actually, there's a really interesting statistic that victims of cyberbullying have been shown to be twice as likely to attempt suicide than the people who are just bullied regularly, or traditional bullying, if you call it. So the need for our product has focused around the idea of connecting two people or two items that necessarily wouldn't have been connected had it not been for the site. And that's the victim of the bullying and the e-volunteer, or the resources provided by the site. Survey via Facebook, face-to-face, everything. Just trying to get as many respondents. We got 29 respondents to our survey. 66% of them were under 29, so it's the younger age. 76% of respondents were female. 59% were self-reported extroverts. So the point in this is that they said they're extroverts. Usually, research shows that usually extroverts are the ones to help out. If there's something that happens, the extrovert will come out and help. So the e-volunteer would most likely be an extrovert. 100% of them reported using Facebook, so that's the biggest realm that we're trying to target. 59% on MySpace, and then 38% on Twitter. And then 48% had indicated that they had bullied others. 97% said that they knew someone who was being bullied right now, cyberbullied right now. But 100% of them said they were able to sympathize, so they're not completely out of the loop. These next two statistics kind of deal with the social problem space as far as the way bullying happens. It's shown that if you grow up in a family where there's multiple siblings and there's bullying tends to transfer into the school life. 31% of our respondents were parents, and 76% reported that if they had a kid, they would expect the child to be more of a victim than a bully. That was kind of interesting. It doesn't really say anything about cause and effect or causation, anything like that, but it's just interesting to see that more people think that there are victims, or they themselves or their children would be a victim of bullying rather than bullying the bully itself. So it's kind of interesting. And I'll pass it off to Eric for the requirements.
To start off, our system requirements were the system will scan public messages transmitted over social media applications for keywords and phrases that are predetermined by our system as bullying. The functional requirements was the system will queue these public messages that match the bullying criteria for further action by volunteers who who monitor these queues. And the user victim e-volunteer, the victim will receive a message from the volunteer containing information and links about anti-bullying strategies and support resources. What we tried to target was design innovations that we felt went above and beyond the resources that are out there to kind of help intervene with bullying. E-Bully leverages the public information provided by social network sites as the primary source for message scanning. So the epicenter of the site is the volunteer activity. There's a live messaging queue that all e-volunteers see that, again, pulls in those message streams from social media sites so they can choose whether it's a false positive or the volunteer needs to somehow intervene. We've also added a volunteer wall feature, and this is actually in two-part. The first part is a kind of a call for help message wall that e-volunteers can post messages to all volunteers online if they believe that there's a bullying scenario going on and they've not dealt with that type of bully or that type of scenario. They can call out to other volunteers to see if maybe they've already dealt with similar situations. And then there's a below that, when we show you the live prototype, there's a conversation piece to that, where if there's two or more volunteers already in a discussion about a certain type of case, instead of volunteers posting a call out, they can join that conversation as well. Okay. I'm going to pass it off to Andre.
Okay, so with that last slide, we'll go right into the prototyping, which kind of takes you through how we got to that actual image that you saw. Did most of our initial prototyping for the low fidelity and even the sketching in Visio. There's a really cool app that you can download, and it makes everything look like a sketch, which kind of makes the interaction a little more free. People aren't so stuck into what the application looks like. So we kind of just began talking through the initial idea. This is actually a project that Steve has been working on for quite some time, and started kind of pulling out what the site looked like in his mind, and then what the other attributes that we were going to pull in. A lot of this lends to Facebook as an application, pulling in the information and then drawing on some basic metaphors that are very, very prevalent in our society. Instant messaging, walls, chats, all those types of concepts. So it wasn't an idea where we were creating something new. It was a collection of a lot of different metaphors, a lot of different concepts that were already available to the user to make the process of learning the system a little easier. So when you look at this compared to the actual low fidelity to the high fidelity, many of the ideas carried over, again, because it was a pretty basic metaphor that we were working from, and a lot of the work was done through other websites. But the idea of putting that information together kind of took a different face in some aspects, specifically in how the volunteer in this instance would manage the relationship or manage the activity. So what you're seeing here from top left, or the two top ones, is the volunteer is looking at the actual messages that have been scanned by the system, and then from there, if they want to review it further, it'll take them to that application, and you'll see Facebook, because that's the most prevalent for our user group, where they can review other messages on that user's wall. Remembering, all of these are public messages. So if that person's being bullied, you're looking at multiple messages. From there, they can decide which way they want to go for the next action that they'd like to take. The evaluation portion of this, when we put together the original low fidelity, we obviously made some changes on our own going into the high fidelity. These are some of the things that we got back from our users as feedback, and even from ourselves just putting it together. Incorporating the ability to escalate an intervention to contacting the authorities or parents. This was a huge debate just within our group of how much information being provided is too much information. Are we contacting the parents or the authorities too soon? Do we have to do this? A lot of those questions came up and still kind of are unresolved, even in the team. Completing the interface for contacting e-bully directly. The concept behind that is the major scenario deals with the volunteer receiving messages into the queue and then reacting to those messages. Well, what about if I'm being bullied by email? It's not necessarily coming through Facebook or Twitter or one of the other major applications, but I still need those resources. This way you're not relying on the volunteer to contact you, but you can come directly to our website and review some of the resources that we have still available to you. Make reviewing more detailed information about threads more obvious. So as the users were interacting with the system, it was kind of difficult to differentiate between the live messaging queue, the volunteer chat, and the volunteer feedback. So just wanting some more call out on those different aspects. In the revised prototype, the big thing that came out was providing some system feedback after each interaction, which I think Eric will touch on more. But just as you transition through the application needed to provide more feedback as to where you were and what was going to happen next. So this example scenario kind of gives you an idea. It's done from the volunteer standpoint, and most of the application, or most of the interaction that you'll see when Eric takes over is going to be from that volunteer standpoint, because that's where the most interaction takes place. So the volunteer sees a message and then has to go through several scenarios to decide, is this bullying or is it not bullying, and what am I going to do based on that? So some quick numbers that we'll get into as we look at the application overall. So user experience issues, we kind of documented major areas of the application that were a problem, from the home page, the dashboard, the intervention section, and then the overall system. We saw most of our issues related around the dashboard and the home page. There was some confusion for users having to switch roles. At one point in time, they were the bully or the victim. At another point in time, they were the volunteer. But the application looked very, very similar, no matter which scenario you were playing out. Major areas where the distinguishable areas of affordance were not immediately present, and the feedback was missing after the interaction. That's something that we had talked about before. Major breakdown areas dealt with the technology and performance, and we felt that had a lot to do with the system not providing the feedback at each interaction, and then the content and labeling. So we went back and revised some of those metaphors. Again, that goes back to the language that we use. Some of it wasn't fitting. One example that I can think of was the volunteer wall. The wall, to one of the users, they told me, communicated that look at the wall, see the post, and then respond. But what we were actually trying to communicate was more of an instant message type system, to where as soon as I send something, it goes out to the volunteer base, someone should respond to me immediately. So the concept that we were trying to articulate was captured by volunteer wall. Misinterpreted affordance and semiotics. Click the name instead of review, the look at the victim's Facebook page. You'll see that once we log in, but the names look like hyperlinks on the main page, and that kind of threw or misrepresented the user as far as what the interaction was that they could do. So now Eric's going to take us through the high fidelity.
Okay. So once a user is determined as a volunteer and they log in, again, they come to the main page with the dashboard. Again, here's the volunteer wall, which is kind of the call out for a volunteer to get into a conversation. If they deem a message possible bullying, they click on review further, which takes them to the Facebook page, so they can look through some of the message threads to decide whether it's bullying or not. Again, they can classify it not bullying, add it to their watch list, or to go ahead and intervene. If they choose not bullying, ask them again if they are sure, and they select that. It tells them that it's been marked as not bullying and takes it out of the queue. If they decide as a volunteer that they're not quite sure they want to watch this item, they can add it to their watch list, and it notifies the other volunteers that there is another volunteer that's watching this specific thread, so they don't necessarily have to watch it themselves. If they intervene, they can type up a message to that victim, add resources, send that message to them. And from a victim standpoint, the message shows up on their Facebook account. They can choose to respond, which takes them to a message portal, and they can submit a message back to that volunteer, which lets that volunteer know that they've got a message waiting.
Any questions?
We have time for one question while the next team gets ready, please. Yes.
Question, one of the things I was wondering about was how, or whether you talked about integrate, like having like privacy controls, because one of the things I can see is when a volunteer kind of having access to information that, you know, is kind of like private lives kind of stuff.
It's a big thing. I mean, where does the line of privacy come in though? So you display this message that's public, does that mean that it's public to everybody, or is there still this idea of, you know, it's still a private conversation. Like you're walking on the street's public, but if you're having a private conversation with someone, that conversation is private still. So that's some technicalities to work out as far as the legality of it and going forward with that. But
the major concept that we were building this around though is we can only access what is public to everybody that would look at your page. So we're not looking into the messages that are being sent to you directly, but just whatever's on your wall post.
Thank you.
All right.